Okay, Erev Tov. The good news is that people are returning to Ashkelon, which is very very nice. And so it's like the name of the piece this week I wrote on the top, "Home Sweet Home." So it's so we're really talking about the concept of Eretz Yisrael in the parsha, but it fits for people getting back home from various places. We just have to hope and pray that soon, most importantly, the Chayalim will soon be home, but also the people that were displaced from all of the Yishuvim, all of the communities around Ritzuat Aza, the Gaza Strip, the Bez Hashem, those will soon be home too. Okay, so we're taking a look at a very simple pasuk that begins this week's parsha that really has a lot of debate about how to apply this very simple statement, which is Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er and Yaakov Avinu departed from Beersheba. He left Beersheba. V'yelech Harana. And the translation in front of me from the JPS says set out, but I would say went. He moved in the direction. He went in the direction of Haran. This very simple 6-word sentence has caused a tremendous amount of controversy over the generations, and hopefully we're going to pull out a message about Eretz Yisrael from this idea. But we're going to start with Rashi, who's not so much talking about Zionism, but he was perplexed by something in the verse. It need have written simply, and Yaakov went to Haran. Why does it have to mention he left Beersheba? So Rashi finds this to be a problem. We're going to add another problem when we get to the Or HaChaim in about 5 minutes or so. But the very famous Rashi, based on a midrash, says it had to mention that he left Beersheba because. Why then does it mention his departure from Beersheba? Because it intends to tell us. It does tell us. It tells us that the departure of a righteous person from his city, when a tzaddik, when a true spiritual influencer, real spiritual guide, a gadol, a giant in spirituality, leaves a place, it makes a roshim, it makes an impact, an impression. As long as a righteous person is in the city, he is its glory, its splendor, and its beauty. When he leaves it, there depart also its glory, its splendor, and its beauty. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about what are the 3 ideas that we talk about with glory, splendor, and beauty. And there are many opinions over what the different ideas are. But the point that's extremely important is that a major tzaddik, a major spiritual guide in a city, provides it with many benefits. We put the benefits into 3 categories. One has to do with people's relationship with God, between Adam and Hamakom. One has to do with when the tzaddik is in the community, that each individual relates better to other people. So one of them has to do with our relationship with God, one has to do with relationship with other people. And the third one, although there are different opinions, one set of ideas is that it talks about that a person's learning is better, a person's relationship to Torah is stronger. But I think that the example of the tzaddik helps a person relate better to himself, that people feel better about who they are. They look at the tzaddik and they see that tzaddik is at peace. And that brings them to this sense of, oh, I can also be at peace. And they are just this spiritual guide and example that helps everybody feel better within their own skin. There are people like Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and he said inspiring things. But I was never exactly comfortable in his presence, especially when I was in his class and I was petrified he'd call on me. But there are people that I think of, like the Boston Rebbe, Reb Levi Horowitz, who was just such a wonderful, sweet person. You just loved being in his presence, and you felt better about yourself, and you felt better about the people around you. That his tzidkus really engendered something very special. And I think that's what Rashi is referring to from this midrash, that when Yaakov left, people no longer had these feelings of well-being on a spiritual, even a psychological way. And I think that's very important. And it was noticed. Okay, it's a beautiful Rashi. We're going to return to this Rashi way at the end in about 40 minutes or so. But Rashi is concerned with the problem that we're going to be working on over the next few minutes, which is the repetition in the verse. The Chizkuni, who is a little bit later than Rashi, also in Europe, he says his concern is the second part of the verse. He says, he left Beersheba. That would have been enough. What does it mean? And he moved towards, walked in the direction of Haran. Haran's a long ways away. Your first couple of steps out of Beersheba in no way is indicative of the fact that you're going to Haran. There are so many places between Beersheba and Haran that you get to first. Haran's about 700, 800 kilometers away. It's a massive trip, as we're going to see in just a few minutes. So what's it mean he walked in the direction of Haran? According to our sages in the Gemara, Masechet Sanhedrin, this means that he arrived in Haran on the same day. So in other words, he had what's called kfitzat haderech. He had, on this trip, he had the road jumped. So he took like one step and he found he was where he was belonged. It's a miracle that we believe a number of tzaddikim, according to the Gemara and the Midrash, happened. So in other words, he left Beersheba and immediately he found himself in Haran. There's a lot of problems with this pshat, but it's very popular, it's very famous. The problem with it is two big problems. The first problem is in the pshat. The next story is he sleeps someplace in either Yerushalayim or Beit El. So clearly he didn't go straight to Haran. So I'm not sure what this is talking about. And the Midrash says that he stopped in the yeshiva of Shem V'Ever, and it took him years to get to Haran. But it solves the problem of avarice. And that was immediately upon leaving Beersheba, he finds himself in Haran. We'll deal with some of the problems in Or Chaim in just a minute. According to our sages, it was a 7-day walk. I think it was more. I think this is something that would have taken a number of months. 17 days doesn't sound like enough time for someone traveling by donkey or camel to get from Beersheba, from Eretz Yisrael, the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, to Haran, which is the northern part of Syria in those days. But okay, from Kiryat Arba to Haran, a distance which Yaakov covered in 12 hours. So he did 17 days worth of walking in 12 hours. Okay, famous Midrash. and it solves the problem in the verse. He leaves and immediately arrives. So that's why it says he left one place and went to the other place. Okay, it solves the minor problem in that verse, but I think it causes bigger problems in the reality and in the pshat of what's going on in the story. Okay, the Or HaChaim brings up what I think is the real problem, which is the reason the Torah did not content itself with reporting Jacob's setting out for Padan Aram and repeats his departure at this point is to allude to the encounters he had on the way. Here's the problem. At the end of last week's Parsha, in chapter in chapter 28, verse 5, it says, Vayishlach Yitzchak et Yitzchak vayelech Padan Aram. Yitzchak sent away Yaakov. He sent Yaakov away, and he left for this place called Padan Aram. So Yaakov already left. So what is it if Yitzchak sent him away? He was already on the road 5 verses ago in last week's Parsha. So how come our Parsha begins with not only now is he leaving Beersheba? This is a real problem. This is a bigger problem than the repetition or the extraneous details in our verse. It seems like Yaakov left Beersheba twice. How can this be? So the Or HaChaim is dealing with what I think is the bigger problem. The reason the Torah did not content itself with reporting Jacob setting out for Padan Aram last week and repeats his departure at this point this week is to allude to the encounters he had in the way. This, of course, raises the question why the Torah had first reported Jacob as already on the way to Padan Aram, when all of a sudden he still has to get out of Beersheba. This is especially curious in view, just for comparison. Okay, I have to see what the comment is. It is. Just for comparison, my grandmother told me it took 3 days to get from Jaffa to Jerusalem by donkey. Yeah, and I think she did it in good time. When you're on Route 1, going from the airport or from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim, Kvish Echad, when you get to where the hill starts going uphill, it's flat. Then you get to Shar Hagai, where the cutoff is to Beit Shemesh on the side and Modi'in on the other side. It starts to go up. There's a place on the side called the Khan, and you can visit it. And that's where people used to spend the night. Nobody traveled in one day from the port in Yafo all the way to Yerushalayim before the 20th century, before motor vehicles, and then at the end of the 1900s they had the train, so you could do it in one day. But before the train, I mean, and if you weren't rich enough to go on the train, you had to stay overnight on the way. Travel was very, very slow. So if you could do it in 2 days, which I think is true. I mean, I know your grandmother said it took 3. I think people could do it in 2 days, and it's about 50 kilometers, which means people did about 25 kilometers a day. And that's it. That's as far as they could get in their slow means of travel. But thank you for that. Okay, this is especially curious view in view of the encounter Jacob had on the way occurring before he even came close to Haran. Why did the Torah report events in a chronologically inverted manner? We don't get things going straight. So how does it go? Besides, why did the Torah speak about Harana instead of Jacob being on the way le-Haran? In other words, sometimes to mean towards Haran, you can either say it le-Haran or Harana. Usually when you're on a trip, we say le-Haran. So why the slightly unusual Charana version? While it is true, as we learned from Breshit Rabbah, that any word which records a letter lamed as a prefix may instead have a hey at the end, like we just said, towards, to. Okay, the Torah surely does not employ these variations arbitrarily. The Torah intended to relate all that happened to Jacob from the time he left his home. The Torah reports that initially all Jacob did was depart. This did not involve any traveling on his part. The person who walked, went, moved, was someone called Harana. This Harana set out from his home to come and welcome Jacob. So, in other words, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva, and somebody else met him. And the somebody else that met him was named Harana. Harana came to help him and guide him. We don't know who this person is. It's a conjecture. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's pshat. This Harana set out from himself to come and welcome Jacob. Also possible the Torah meant to convey to us that Esau's anger, Harano, his Haron af, his terrible anger departed from him the moment Jacob departed from Beersheba. This is expressed in the word Vayele Harana. So in other words, Jacob leaves Beersheba, and at that moment, his brother who wanted to kill him is no longer angry because he's no longer around and out of sight, out of mind. And so perhaps that's what it means. I don't think any of these help us all that much in trying to really understand what's going on in our parsha. Okay. But now we see that we've got two different problems. Number one, the Torah tells us twice that he left from Beersheba. And problem number two, why does it have to tell us his departure and his destination? Rabbeinu Bechaya, it is clear that when the Torah mentioned that he departed from Beersheba, he must have first obtained permission from God to do so. He's got to leave Beersheba sort of twice. Once he's being pushed to leave by his father, and he doesn't really want to go until he gets permission from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to leave. This brings up the big problem. Leaving Eretz Yisrael is not so pashut. And we're going to, in just a few minutes, we're going to come back to this point. Is it permitted to actually leave Eretz Yisrael? So this may be its own issue, which we'll come to in a minute. He did so as otherwise he could not comply with the commandment of his father to go to his uncle Lavan and to marry one of his daughters. The words he went to Haran, they may mean that he obtained permission for this specific journey and its purpose. If you don't mind, flip to the back of the page for just 1 minute. At the bottom of the back of the page, and we're going to return to this idea a little bit later, the Rambam in Hilchot Malachim, laws about kings and about government in Eretz Yisrael, says it's quoting Gemara actually from Ketubot. It's forbidden to leave Eretz Yisrael la'olam. Nobody's clear what it means la'olam. It can mean it's prohibited to leave Israel forever. Now, you can leave Israel, but you have to be planning to come back. In other words, to leave Eretz Yisrael, you're supposed to have a return ticket. You're not supposed to leave Eretz Yisrael la'olam. Other people say it is always prohibited from leaving Eretz Yisrael, which means you shouldn't leave at all. It's fascinating. I know, I'm at a minyan where it's a lot of people are originally from Chutz La'aretz, but there are a few people that have always lived in Eretz Yisrael. And there's one guy in the minyan who's very proud of the fact that he has never left Eretz Yisrael. He was born here, and he's never left Eretz Yisrael. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, we have family in America. We go, but like I said, we go with a return ticket. We go, but we know we're coming right back. But leaving Eretz Yisrael is a problem, and therefore there are reasons when you can leave, except to study Torah. Let's say for some reason there were no good yeshivot in Eretz Yisrael, which in the Middle Ages may have sometimes been true. It's not true today, Baruch Hashem. And then it says you can leave Eretz Yisrael to get married. If for some reason you have trouble getting a shidduch in Eretz Yisrael, you can leave Eretz Yisrael to find a shidduch, which is our case. So the Gemara has already, and the Rambam makes it Jewish law, but it's already a Gemara in Ketubot that is permitted to leave Eretz Yisrael for a shidduch. And the third one, which we know from Avraham, and we know from Yaakov, that it is permitted to leave Eretz Yisrael in time of famine. If there's no food, you can leave Eretz Yisrael to survive, and hopefully when the famine is over, you come back. And this is a common story in Jewish history. It happened with Avram. Yitzchak was going to leave, and God said, no, you can't leave. But then it happens with the family of Yaakov. It happens in the story of Ruth and her family, and I have a Machatenister whose family left Eretz Yisrael at the beginning of World War I because they were starving. They went to Egypt and they only came back at the beginning of World War II. Leaving Eretz Yisrael because there's nothing to eat was unfortunately historically common incident. Okay, we're going to come back to that idea. So back to the Rabbeinu Bechaya. So he needs permission to leave Eretz Yisrael. So according to the Breshit Rabbah, Yaakov reasoned that just as God had appeared to his father at this spot, he might appear to him in response to his prayer. If he were to permit him to leave the land of Israel, he would go. If he would not, he wouldn't leave his country. So in other words, Yitzchak was sending him out of the country. Yaakov wasn't going to go till HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him permission, which is very beautiful. And we believe happens in the dream with the ladder that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to take care of you, and then you'll come back. Okay. You may now understand the proper sequence of what occurred. Number one, Yaakov left. He encountered God. He spent the night there where he had that encounter. The word ba makom with the vowel patah, ba, onto the letter bet alludes to a place he already knew about, which was Ha Moriah, Mount Moriah, which is where the Akedah took place. So all the family knew about it. Plus, it's later where the Beit HaMikdash will be, where he previously had a vision of God. Permission to travel northward was granted to God, said to him he would be with him. After Yaakov had spent the night on Mount Moriah, Ha Moriah, here in Yerushalayim, Temple Mount. That is, he got promised to bring him back to the land. The reference of to this land meant he would dafka specifically come back to Beersheba, which is part of the land of Israel, the southern border of Israel. Having had this assurance, now Yaakov can set out in his it's northeasterly direction. But okay. Another midrash, focusing on the words Vayifgam Makom, when he gets to the place where he has the dream with the ladder, which is the Temple Mount, he encountered the place, states that when Yaakov was already close to Haran, it suddenly occurred to him that he might have passed by a place where his father and grandfather had encountered God. So he gets all the way to Haran, miraculously comes all the way back. He goes all the way back there to Israel to get permission to leave. Oh, I didn't get my ticket. I had to come all the way back to Eretz Yisrael. I mean, it sounds almost like a joke, but I think that a lot of these European commentators realize how long and difficult these travels were. And a lot of them believe that a lot of these travels took place kfitzat haderech, miraculously. So he comes all the way back. As he made ready to retrace his steps, the earth folded beneath his feet so that he encountered the spot in question without having to go back all that way. So it was that second time that he got kfitzat haderech. Okay. The place in question was Mount Moriah. The true message of that midrash is that Yaakov expressed a longing for Mount Moriah and the chance to offer a prayer there. Yaakov has to leave Eretz Yisrael, but he does it grudgingly. A lot of what's going on in this story is about Chibat Eretz Yisrael, the affection and connection to Israel. Yes, sometimes we have to leave, but we only do it grudgingly. And we only do it hopefully temporarily. That the people that live here feel connected to it. And Yaakov and Abraham, even when they had to leave, still just felt that tug to be back in Eretz Yisrael. That the major issue going on, according to Rabbeinu Bechaye, is the affection of the Jew for the land and the connection of the land to the Jew. The true message of that midrash is that Yaakov expressed a longing for Mount Moriah and the chance to offer a prayer there. God obliged him by saving him the journey, and he experienced a sensation equivalent to Mount Moriah being where he found himself. There is also a midrash in Pirkei de Rebbe Lazar, according to which Yaakov took 12 of the stones from the altar Avram had built on Mount Moriah, and on which his father had been bound. So, in other words, when it took stones from the place, he took 12 stones. And those 12 stones had been on Mount Moriah because they made the Mizbeach, the altar where Abraham was attempting to sacrifice Yitzchak at the Akedah, and eventually did sacrifice the ram. So those 12 stones representing eventually the 12 sons and tribes, and according to the Midrash, combined into one stone when he woke up in the morning, were actually the stones used by Avram Avinu in the Akedah and the sacrifice of the ram. This was a hint that in the future 12 tribes would emerge from him, and they would all merge to become a single nation. And that even though we fight, and Jews are always, having these internal, internal dissensions, that when push comes to shove, we get together. One of the nicest things of the terrible situation in which we find ourselves, all of the people saying, B'yachad ninatzeach, together we will win. The success of the nation is incumbent upon us being b'yachad. And that was the symbolism of the stones that he took, the 12 stones from the altar, puts them around himself to sleep, and in the morning they're one stone. The symbolism, is for us now. And the whole war is terrible. It's like I can't control myself. I don't want to follow what's going on, but I can't not follow what's going on. It's like I've got this, this push and shove going on. When I sit down at the computer, I want to write something, but I have to check the news, and I have to, and you get sick from so many of the things. Things going on here, things going on in Chutz La'aretz. It's just. But the one plus is that Baruch Hashem, the nation is pulling together, and something that just a few months ago we thought, will the Medina ever have unity again? And it took a terrible, terrible group of Rishaim, of terrible people, but right now we're unified, and that's the symbolism of the stones. Okay, the Sfat Emet has the same problem. When did he leave? How does he leave? And he deals with it in a different way. We see that this halicha, this walking, the yele, he goes, gave merit to Yaakov to achieve shleimut. Before this halicha, he truly was hidden. Before this incident, Yaakov wasn't yet Yaakov. Yaakov becomes the patriarch during this trip. He was on a mission to get married, but he's also on a mission to become the patriarch that he is supposed to be. Before this, he was a bit of a nebbish. I hate to use the not so nice to say, but he was a mama's boy. He wasn't out in the world. He wasn't ready to face the world and deal with issues. Okay. Therefore, the text doubles his leaving. Why did he leave once when Yitzchak sends him, and now he goes on his own? Because the first leaving, when his father pushes him onto the road, was his flight. He's running away. The second was for the real Yaakov to emerge. So there's two things going on. There is Yaakov running away, and there is Yaakov very much like a caterpillar emerging from the chrysalis to become the butterfly, which is Yaakov. He emerges from the shadow of his brother and becomes a hero in his own right. Yaakov, without leaving Beersheba, couldn't have been that hero that all by himself pushes the rock off the well later in a parsha, or later is ready to stand up to Lavan, or later stands up to the Malach in next week's Torah, stands up to Esau. This Yaakov was emerging during this trip. It was very hard for Yaakov to depart from Eretz Yisrael. And because of this great yearning for the land, God revealed to him the reality of the temple in his dream as part of his growth. This trip was a preparation and counsel for future exiles to help us, litakein, to fix, to repair ourselves even in Galut. In other words, even when the Jews are spending all, and of course he wrote this in Gór, a suburb of Warsaw in Poland in the end of the 1800s. And he says, we're getting ready to come back. And Baruch Hashem, his son in the 1930s did make Aliyah to come the Imre Emet. His son did come to Eretz Yisrael and make Aliyah because his father had told him that's what Jews are supposed to do. This references then us, Ayin Zion, he went towards safety. So he said there's a verse that talks about this, and the beginning of that verse, Az hu halach lebitachon, he went on his way. Okay, he fled, but was not changed at all by the experience. He remained connected to his route to Eretz Yisrael, even in Padan Aram, in Haran, which was above the natural realm. It was supernatural how connected he remained. This is the word Aleph Zion, which means he rose above the 7 days of nature. The Zion Shiva Yemei Shavua, since Yaakov is connected to the one, to Hashem above nature. This is, he left Beersheba and emerged as himself and became a miraculous person. He rose above nature. Okay. The next two commentaries are modern. They're both alive. One of them, second one I've met. First one I haven't. And they're talking much more in a Zionist mode about this issue of leaving Eretz Yisrael, emerging from who he is. And I hope we feel more connected to these ideas. Okay. So Rabbi Abba Wagensberg, writing on, he has a website where he writes articles. The verse continues, and he went towards Haran. Jacob understands that his journey will cause his descendants to be exiled in the future. Ma'aseh avot siman labanim. All I shouldn't say all, many of the things that happened to the patriarchs end up happening to us, their descendants. And we believe that the stories of him leaving the country, this is a hint to the fact that the Jewish nation will many times be in exile, even though from the time of Yeshua till today, there have always been some Yehudim, some Jews here in Eretz Yisrael, but the majority was often outside the land. As a matter of fact, the majority of Jews have been outside of Israel from 721 BCE until about 2 years ago. And now, Baruch Hashem, again, for the first time in 2,700 years, the majority of Jews are back in Eretz Yisrael. And hopefully that's the beginning of the true Geula. Okay. According to the Kedushat Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, famous Hasidic Rebbe of the third generation, the word Haran, again, doesn't mean the place. It's related to the phrase Haronaf, anger. Just like we saw in Rabbeinu Bechaye, it's a pun, okay? God's displeasure at the Jewish people's behavior will result in their exile from the land. He's leaving because of God's anger. It's not the anger, like Rabbeinu Bechaye said, of his brother. When Jews leave Eretz Yisrael, it's because of the anger of God, whether it was in the time of the destruction of the first temple, or the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, or the time of the Assyrians exiling the 10 northern tribes. When Jews leave Eretz Yisrael, it's because of God's anger. This knowledge causes Jacob great pain. As the next part of the verse indicates, and he encountered the place, Vayifka b'makom. Another pun. The word Vayifga, which can mean paga, to reach a place, shares the root with the word lifgoa, to be injured. Yaakov spends a lot of time in pain. And this is the first time that we have it, but he's going to limp away from his encounter with the angel. He's going to find pain in the death of his beloved wife, Rachel. He talks to Pharaoh and says his life has been full of difficulties and pain. Pain is something that accompanies much of Yaakov's life. Okay. Furthermore, the word makom often refers to God. Now, we said, again, Rabbeinu Bechaye said, ba makom, he's going to reach or be injured by a place. We said, the place, that's the Beit HaMikdash. But Rabbi Wagensberg is saying, no, makom is another, hamakom yirachem. God is called hamakom, the place, the foundation of the world. We can understand from these words that Yaakov did not only feel the people's pain at being exiled, but he also felt God's pain at being compelled to exile his children. Yes, Galut is painful for the Jews, but we believe, and God tells this to Rachel in chapter 31 of Yirmiyahu, the Haftarah, for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. God is pained by the Jews not being in Eretz Yisrael as well. Jacob was sensitive to the pain of exile for the Jews and for Hashem. This teaches us a valuable lesson as he's going out of the country into Galut about the importance of feeling other people's pain. Jews have to have empathy. I like to think that the best translation for the word rachamanut is really empathy, feeling the pain of others. Jacob left Beersheba and he set out for Haran. Not only is there repetition of his departure, but his departure is different in each verse. The two times we talk about it, we say it differently. In the beginning, last week, at the end of last week's portion, when it first says he got sent away and left, it says that Yaakov went to Padan Aram. But in our verse, beginning this week's Parsha, it says he went to Haran. What's the difference? They're two names for the same area, but we believe that there's a different message in using the different names. Haran is actually mentioned earlier when Rivka first tells Yaakov to leave after he becomes aware of Esau's plan to harm him, to kill him. Now, my son, listen to me, flee at once to Haran to my brother Lavan. It appears that the difference between Haran and Padan Aram represent two different aspects of Yaakov's journey. Yaakov flees to Haran to escape the consequences of his dealings with Esau, but he is sent to Padan Aram to properly find a wife, unlike the improper wives that Esau took. Let's review. Before we do, Professor Grossman, let's review about the two different leavings. We said before that going to Padan Aram was to flee from his brother. Going to Haran was for him to emerge as a Torah giant in the Jewish nation. That's what the Sfat Emet said. But here, Rabbi Wagensberg said, no. It's similar that going to Haran is to get away from Esau. Going to Padan Aram is to get a wife. So, in other words, the different names of the location are characteristic of different objectives in the travel. Okay, I saved the best for last. Rabbi Grossman, Professor Yonatan Grossman, who I've met at Yeshivat Har Etzion. He teaches at Herzog there and in the yeshiva there, but he also teaches in Bar Ilan, a big Talmud Chacham and a scholar of Tanakh generally. But he does lecture on other things as well. This week's Parsha, by the way, this is a very long essay that I just took a small piece out of. This week's Parsha features a great surprise. What's the surprise? Yaakov leaves Eretz Yisrael. I mean, once people come to Eretz Yisrael, we should be shocked that they leave. This should bother us. This should upset us. So it starts with something, wow, Yaakov's going to leave Eretz Yisrael. So he's going to go to the family of Rivka. He's going to undo a lot of good stuff that we've been working on in the last Parshiot, digging wells, making mizbechot, getting acquainted and connected to the land, and all of a sudden Yaakov leaves. This is such a surprise given the resolve of Avram's family to remain in Canaan. In other words, the repetition of he's leaving to one place, he's going to another place, that it's a big deal. The reason it's a big deal and it gets repeated is because it's not easy to leave Eretz Yisrael. The repetition and all of the verbiage about the fact that he's going is to remind us leaving Eretz Yisrael is really something not to be taken lightly. Okay. Why then does God encourage Yaakov to leave in the dream? We're not really covering the dream, but he sees the ladder and in Hashem's top of the ladder. And we mentioned earlier already that Hashem gives him permission to leave, and I'll bring you back. Okay. Upon examining this episode, we're reminded of Avraham. Why are we reminded of Avraham? This association emerges from two similarities between the two. Number one, God's initial appearance to Avram involves a clear command. Go from your land, your birthplace, and your father's home to the land which I will show you. Avraham must detach himself from his past, family, and homeland. This element of detachment from one's family finds clear expression with regard to Yaakov's journey as well. Yaakov is also leaving his birthplace, his homeland, his family. Very similar. Two, another feature binds these two journeys together. Immediately preceding the departure of each, a special blessing is bestowed. Avram's departure from his homeland was instructed by the Almighty, and the blessing is given to by God. You will be a blessing to all people. Whoever blesses you will be blessed. Whoever curses you will be cursed. There's a big blessing that's given to him when God says Lech Lecha. Yaakov, before his journey, receives a blessing both from Yitzchak as well as from God. Yitzchak gives him the blessing, Birchat Avraham, before he leaves, and then God gives the bracha at the dream with the ladder. We then discover that these journeys ultimately are almost exactly identical, almost the same thing. The Torah records 3 stages. Now, he's really looking ahead now. When Yaakov returns, his return into the country, it was very similar to Avraham's. 1, arrival in Shechem, the first place where Avraham noticed the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael was when he got to Shechem and he built an altar there, where he constructs an altar, first altar that we ever see him building. He then embarks again, this time reaches Beit El, further down the road in Modern Israel. It's right down Route 60. Actually, that's the highway in front of the street in front of our house, Route 60. It goes right through Shechem, Beit El, our house, and then goes all the way to Beersheba, where he once again builds an altar. Finally, he heads southward towards Hebron, where the third and final altar is erected, again, right on Route 60. Remarkably, Yaakov's return to Canaan corresponds to the entry of his grandfather. He first purchases a plot of land near Shechem and builds an altar. Then comes the terrible story about his daughter Dinah, which is also in Shechem. But he bought a piece of land and he built an altar there. That piece of land that he bought ends up becoming the kever of Yosef, the place where Yosef in the future is going to be buried. He then proceeds to Beit El, where he constructs another altar, and it's right before that his wife dies, and right there also Devorah dies, and from there he continues to Hebron. Thus, Yaakov's departure from Canaan, the blessing from God, and Yaakov's return to Canaan parallels his grandfather's arrival. Perhaps the most significant of the similarities is Yaakov's departure to Haran. He returns to his grandfather's birthplace for the nation of Israel. Like Avram, he becomes the initiator of the process, not its perpetuator. Yitzchak is an and son. Yitzchak is clearly a continuation of Avraham. His job is to consolidate the things that Avraham did. He's not going to be a new initiator. He's not a mechadesh. He's not an initiator. He's not starting anything new. He is continuing the work of his father. But that's not true of Yaakov. Once Yaakov packs his bags and heads towards Haran, thus embarking on a new beginning of God's covenant, the Torah leaves Yitzchak and brings us along with Yaakov throughout his journey. Yitzchak only gets mentioned one more time, and that was to record his death. From now on, Yaakov is the star of our story. Commenting on the verse, Yaakov left Beersheba. Chazal note, the righteous person in a city is its glory. This is what we started with the Rashi. Rashi quotes this midrash, is its glory. He is its splendor. He is its pride. When he leaves, its glory, splendor, and pride leave. Yaakov's abandonment had such an effect on his homeland, despite the ongoing presence of Yitzchak in the city. How could the Torah, Rashi, the Midrash say that Beersheba lost its glory when Yitzchak was still there? Rivka was still there. What is it teaching us? Indeed, the Shekhinah leaves Beersheba and accompanies Yaakov on his way to establish the foundations of the nation of Israel. What we have really in these psukim, he leaves Beersheba, he goes to Padan Aram. He leaves Beersheba, he goes to Haran. He then has the dream. What we really have in these stories is the changing of the guard. We have the passing of the rulership, the leadership of the nation from Yitzchak to Yaakov. And Yaakov, for the rest of the Sefer, I mean, we're only at the halfway point in the book of in the book of Bereshit. The first half of the book is, Adam, Noah, Avraham, Yitzchak. The second half of the book is Yaakov and his sons. Yaakov is now the focus of the story. And we're Yaakov. Avraham and Yitzchak are really wonderful people, and they are the founders of the nation. But we're Yisrael. We're Yaakov. We are the ones who live all of his experiences. And we live his exile, we live his return, we live his struggles. Avraham and Yitzchak really don't struggle with people. It's Yaakov who has to struggle with Lavan, he has to struggle with Esav, he has to struggle with his own sons later on in the story. We really are Yaakov. And when we have the reset of the story of Bereshit here in our Parsha, it's for us to identify with Yaakov. And Yaakov's efforts are all to establish the family here in Eretz Yisrael. And for him to do that, he has to leave and then retrace the steps of Avraham Avinu as establishing the nation, the sons, and their progeny here in Eretz Yisrael. And that's what it's all about. It's the shock of leaving and the importance of coming back. We are now in the midst of the difficulties of coming back. This war is to, again, prove to ourselves and the world that this is where we belong. The world is out there saying terrible things about us not belonging here. This is the only place we belong. The world doesn't get it, or most of the world. Baruch Hashem, we do have friends and supporters who do understand that this is the only Jewish homeland, as opposed to there being 22 Arab homelands, Muslim places of living. And that's what's going on in our story. Yaakov is establishing, through retracing the steps of Avraham, to teach us how important Eretz Yisrael is to our story. Jewish history is all about the trip to Israel and eventually the establishment here. And this story is going to go on until the Geula Shlema, until Mashiach comes. It's always going to be us following the stories and struggles of Yaakov. And when we look at this, we have to see he's leaving, but the entire leaving is predicated on the coming back and the establishing of the family here in Eretz Yisrael, here in our promised land, our holy land, our home. It really has to speak to us during these days, and we have to just tune out. We have to tune out all of those terrible people who don't understand the love, the connection, the relationship between us and Eretz Yisrael. That's what our parsha is ultimately about. That's what this war is about. And Be'ezrat Hashem, soon we will reestablish our hold over everything, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to bless us with Mashiach and the Geula Shlema. And I just hope this is just a bump in that road, that we get to the true destination speedily, quickly in our days. Thank you so much for joining us.
Amen.
Thank you.
And we
רבה.
just have to remember, sometimes the pain is just part of the journey.
Thank you so much.
Erev Tov. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Rabbi.
And let people know I'll have the recording up tomorrow. Okay, and hopefully everyone will be back in Beersheba soon. Beersheba, in Ashkelon too. Beersheba too, but also especially Ashkelon. Bye-bye.
Bye.